Keela's POV.
As we stepped into the cave, my breath caught in my throat. My mouth hung open in awe as I took in the sight before me. The cave was enormous, far larger than I could have imagined from the outside. It felt like an underground stadium, its sheer size making me feel small and insignificant. The walls stretched high above us, and the ceiling arched into a vast dome that seemed to go on forever. In the center of the cave, where I expected to see some sort of battle ring, there was only an open space, secured by heavy steel chains forming a loose boundary. The ground was covered in sand, giving it the appearance of an arena, yet it felt unfinished, as if something crucial was missing. The emptiness of the ring added to the unsettling atmosphere, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. As we walked further inside, I noticed the variety of packs gathered around. Some were chatting quietly among themselves, while others stood in groups, their eyes trained on us. The tension was thick, and I could feel it gnawing at my nerves. Several men with an aura of authority approached us. They exchanged greetings with Ralph, their words laced with underlying currents of power and authority. Some of them shot me curious glances, while others barely acknowledged my presence, their disinterest almost palpable. The disapproving looks and dismissive glares made my stomach churn, and I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my belly. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. The overwhelming size of the cave, the intimidating presence of the other alphas, the different packs, the empty ring that seemed to promise more than just a simple fight. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but the weight of the situation pressed down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, Ralph's hand was on my arm, his touch firm yet gentle. He leaned in close, his voice low and reassuring. "Stay close to me, Keela. Whatever happens, don't let go of my hand." I nodded at his words, the firm grip of his hand anchoring me to the present moment. As much as I wanted to appear calm and collected, I couldn't shake the growing unease gnawing at my insides. The weight of the unknown pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Just then, Dahlia and Jay appeared, their faces a mix of concern and determination. Dahlia's eyes flickered over me, her brow furrowing as she took in my pale complexion. Jay's expression was unreadable, but his presence alone provided some comfort. "Stay with Keela," Ralph instructed them, his voice calm but laced with urgency. He turned to me, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "I have to take care of something, but I won't be long. Remember what I said, stay close to Dahlia and Jay, and don't leave their side." Before I could respond, he was already moving away, his stride confident and purposeful as he disappeared into the crowd. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. The cave's vastness felt even more oppressive without Ralph by my side, and the strange looks from the other pack members only heightened my anxiety. As the hours passed, the tension in the air grew thicker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My unease manifested in the constant scratching at my neck, right where Damen had marked me. The skin there tingled with a strange sensation, almost as if his presence lingered just beneath the surface. I tried to convince myself that it was just nerves, but the persistent itch wouldn't let up. Every time my fingers brushed against the mark, a shiver ran down my spine. Could Damen be here? The thought sent a wave of dread through me, and I found myself glancing around, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I need to find out if Damien's here, I told myself, the resolve hardening in my chest. But how could I do that without raising suspicion? Dahlia and Jay were keeping a close eye on me, and there was no way they would let me wander off on my own. But this day was too important for Ralph. If Damen was here, it couldn't be for anything good. The thought of him ruining everything, hurting Ralph, was more than I could bear. I had to stop him, whatever the cost. But first, I need to get out of here without Dahlia noticing. As I stood there, my eyes darting between Dahlia and Jay, I noticed a change in their conversation. Dahlia's attention seemed to drift, her focus shifting entirely to whatever Jay was saying. Their voices were low, but I could tell it was something serious, something that had both of them engrossed. I felt a pang of guilt in my chest, knowing I was about to betray their trust, but the urgency in my heart wouldn't be silenced. I waited for the perfect moment. biding my time until Dahlia's gaze was fully averted. My fingers trembled as I took a careful step backwards, then another. My heart raced, pounding in my ears as I moved slowly, inching away from them. When I was far enough, I turned and slipped quietly into the shadows of the cave, making my way toward the exit. Once outside, the cold night air hit me like a shockwave. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the sharp chill cut through my clothing, sending an icy shiver down my spine. Goosebumps prickled across my skin, and for a fleeting moment, I hesitated. I glanced back at the cave entrance, where warmth and safety beckoned, and then head to the looming forest, its dark silhouette cast by the pale light of the moon. No, this is not a good idea, I thought, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. I pivoted, ready to retreat into the cave, but something stopped me in my tracks. A flicker of movement in the forest caught my eye. My breath hitched as I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out what, or who it was. The shadows shifted, and I could just barely discern the outlines of figures moving among the trees. Their shapes were indistinct, but there was something about their presence that sent a jolt of unease through me. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see more clearly, but the distance and the dim light made it impossible to identify them. Yet, deep in my gut, I knew. These people, whoever they were up to no good. The air around them seemed to thrum with a sinister energy, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Determination hardened in my chest as I decided to follow the shadowy figures into the forest. The chill in the air grew more intense with each step I took, as if the very atmosphere was warning me to turn back. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of dread that told me something sinister was at play, something that could threaten everything Ralph had worked for. As I ventured deeper, the cold air seemed to wrap around me like a shroud, and the sounds of the night grew muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The figures stopped at a small clearing, just out of sight from the cave, and I crouched behind a large tree, watching intently. One of the men turned slightly, and my heart skipped a beat when I recognized him. A member of the council, someone I had seen with Zack before. The other man was broad-shouldered and unfamiliar, his presence exuding a quiet menace that made my skin crawl. The council member reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, his movements deliberate and careful. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the darkness obscured my view. He poured something from the object into the other man's hand. The broad man accepted it without a word, his expression unreadable in the dim light. My mind raced with questions. What were they doing? What was in that vial? And why were they meeting out here, away from the others? Curiosity and confusion warred within me, and before I could stop myself, I inched closer, desperate to see what they were holding. The forest floor was littered with twigs and leaves, and in my haste, I accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sharp snap echoed through the still night, loud and jarring. They both froze, their heads snapping in my direction. Panic surged through me as their gazes locked onto the spot where I was hiding. I barely had time to think before they began moving toward me, their expressions darkening with suspicion. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled backwards, my foot catching on a root. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of what the broad man held in his hand, a gold metal jug, intricately designed, its surface gleaming even in the dim light. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of fear crashing through me. I tried to push myself up, but my body refused to cooperate, paralyzed by the fear that gripped me. They were getting closer, their footsteps crunching ominously on the forest floor. I was trapped, and they were going to catch me. Just as they were about to reach me, a strong hand suddenly grabbed my arm, yanking me backwards with such force that the world blurred around me. The next thing I knew, I was no longer in the clearing. The sounds of the men's footsteps faded into the distance as the forest seemed to shift around me, and before I could comprehend what was happening, I was standing in a different part of the woods, far from the cave. I looked up to see who had dragged me away, my heart still pounding with terror. My breath caught in my throat as my gaze locked onto a familiar face, Damien. I stared at Damien, my mind whirling with 1,000 thoughts. His sudden appearance left me speechless, and the raw intensity in his eyes sent another shiver down my spine. The anger in his voice cut through the night air, sharp and cold. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find the words to explain myself. I saw something, I finally managed to stammer, my voice trembling. Those men, they were up to something, and I had to know what it was. And did you find out what it was? He demanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the darkness. The fury in his tone was unmistakable, and it sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I was about to, but things didn't go my way, I admitted, the frustration in my voice matching my racing thoughts. I could still see the shadows moving in the forest, the broad man's hand holding the gold jug, the council member's secretive actions. It was all so close, and yet I had nothing to show for it except the gnawing fear that I was in way over my head. Damien raked a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Don't you realize how dangerous it is out here for you to wander alone?" he snapped, his voice rising. "Do you think everyone loves you so much that they'll just let you go on your merry way if they see you?" His words hit me like a slap in the face, but before I could let the hurt settle in, anger flared up inside me. "You don't have to remind me," I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. "I know it already. And trust me, I don't care anymore if they love me or not. The love I receive from Ralph is enough to care." "Does he know you're out here?" Damien asked, his tone laced with sarcasm, pretending to be a specialist spy. "No," I admitted, my voice quieter but no less resolute. "But he has enough on his plate already. I thought maybe I could help, that I could do something useful." Damien sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "Keela, I know you want to help, but this isn't the way. You're putting yourself in danger, and you're only going to make things harder for Ralph if something happens to you." His words stung, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd acted on impulse, driven by a need to prove myself, to protect the people I cared about. But in doing so, I'd nearly walked straight into a trap. I sighed, the weight of Damien's words pressing down on me. "I know, Damien," I murmured, my voice softer now. "You're right, I'll go back. Dahlia's probably looking for me by now anyway." I glanced up at him, the frustration still simmering in my chest. "But before you take me back, tell me, what are you doing here? How did you know about today's fight and where it was going to take place? Do you have a spy in Ralph's house?" Damien's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "What I'm doing here is none of your business, human," he replied coldly. "Of course, it's my business, Mr. Vampire." I snapped, my voice rising. "This is a special day for Ralph, and I won't let you or anyone else ruin it. I know you're not here with good intentions, but please, whatever you're planning, let it wait until the fight is over." Before I could finish my sentence, he moved with lightning speed, his arms wrapping around me as if I weighed nothing. In the blink of an eye, he whooshed me through the air, the world around me a blur. I barely had time to register what was happening before I found myself back at the cave. He set me down gently, his expression unreadable, and without a word, he vanished into thin air like a wisp of smoke. Still puzzled, a sharp voice snapped me back to reality. "Keela, do you want to get yourself killed?" Dahlia's voice was laced with anger, cutting through the fog in my mind. I turned towards her, feeling a pang of guilt as I saw the fury in her eyes. I'm sorry," I stammered, taking a step towards her. The anger in Dahlia's expression softened, and for a moment, she just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence between us stretched, and I could see the fear lingering in her gaze. It made my chest tighten with regret. "Please, don't do that again," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was so scared that something bad had happened to you. I don't know what I would have told Alpha if—" Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head as if trying to shake away the worst of her thoughts. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before looking at me again. "What were you doing out here alone in the first place?" she asked, her tone more controlled now but still tinged with concern. I wasn't feeling well," I replied, trying to sound convincing. "I came out to get some fresh air to clear my head." The lie felt heavy on my tongue, but I wasn't ready to tell her the full truth. She didn't say anything more. Instead, she grabbed my arm and started pulling me back inside the cave. "Come on, we need to get back," she said, her voice still holding a trace of anger. As we hurried inside, she added, "Ralph and Zach are in the ring." My heart skipped a beat at her words. Ralph and Zach? Already in the ring? The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me like a wave. The air was thick with tension, and all eyes were on the center of the ring, where Ralph and Zach stood facing each other. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene. Each of them held a gold jug in their hands, identical to the one I'd seen in the forest. My heart pounded as confusion washed over me. Dahlia, I whispered urgently, my eyes never leaving the scene before me. Why are they holding those gold jugs? What's in them? Dahlia's gaze flickered toward the ring, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to be searching for the right words. It's a ritual, she began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. The jugs contain a special liquid, a mix of herbs and other things. It's part of the fight, a test of strength and resilience. A test? I echoed, confusion knotting my thoughts. What does it do? Dahlia hesitated again, her eyes clouded with worry. It tests their control, she finally said. Over themselves, over their powers. Whoever can withstand the effects the longest has the advantage. But it's dangerous, it can push them to their limits, and if something goes wrong. The unease in his chest grew heavier as I watched the scene unfold before me. The image of the council member pouring something into the gold jug in the forest replayed in my mind. My heart raced as I struggled to connect the dots between what I'd seen and what was happening now. My thoughts churned with the fear that whatever was in one of those jugs might not be just a test. It could be something far more sinister. I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood, the pain grounding me in the present, but also amplifying the dread. What if whatever they added to those jugs was meant to Ralph to harm him? The thought made my stomach churn, and my breath caught in my throat. Time seemed to slow as Ralph and Zach raised their jugs to their mouths. My panic surged uncontrollably, the sight of those jugs about to be consumed, pushing me to the edge. I couldn't take it any longer. The image of Ralph falling victim to whatever was in that jug was too horrifying. My voice broke through the silence like a thunderclap, desperate and frantic. Stop! I shouted, the word tearing from my throat. The cavern echoed with my cry, the sound ricocheting off the walls and filling the space with raw panic. Heads turned toward me, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Ralph and Zach paused mid-action, their eyes flicking toward me as the tension in the room reached its peak. Dahlia's grip on my arm tightened, her own face a mask of concern and confusion. What's wrong? Ralph's voice cut through my thoughts through the mind link, a mix of irritation and worry lacing his tone. His eyes bore into mine, demanding an explanation. I began, but my words tangled in my throat, tripping over each other in my frantic state. The gravity of the situation paralyzed me, even as I tried to gather the scattered pieces of my explanation. I couldn't find the words, couldn't force my thoughts into any coherent explanation. The truth lodged in my throat, tangled with the certainty that if I revealed what I knew, no one would believe me. Before I could even process what I was doing, I bolted down the cave steps, my feet moving of their own accord. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on me, their confusion and shock palpable, but I didn't care. I had only one thought in my mind: protect Ralph, no matter the cost. I reached the edge of the ring, bending low over the steel chains that marked its boundary. Ignoring Ralph's sharp, questioning voice in my mind link, I slipped into the ring. My eyes locked on the gold jug in his hand. Keela, what the hell are you doing? Ralph's voice cut through the air, sharp and bewildered. But I ignored him, my focus solely on the gold jug. Without hesitation, I snatched it from his grip, the cold metal biting into my fingers. Keela, stop! Ralph shouted, reaching for me, but I moved too quickly. I raised the jug to my lips, the bitter scent of its contents filling my nostrils. The crowd gasped loudly, a collective intake of breath that echoed off the cave walls. I tilted the jug and drank deeply, the liquid flooding my mouth with a strange, bitter taste that sent a shiver down my spine. It was unlike anything I'd ever tasted, metallic, earthy, and tinged with something darker, something I couldn't quite place. But I forced myself to swallow, feeling the burn as it slid down my throat. The crowd's gasp grew louder, a wave of shock and disbelief rippling through the cave. But I didn't let it distract me. I dropped the now empty jug to the sandy ground with a hollow clang and turned, making my way toward where the council members stood. My eyes zeroed in on the one council member I'd seen in the forest, the one who had poured something into the jug. His eyes blazed with fury, his jaw tightening in barely contained rage. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled. A small, defiant curve of my lips that held a silent victory. I had done it. Whatever he had planned, whatever poison or foul magic had been meant for Ralph, I had taken it upon myself. Ralph was safe, and that was all that mattered.
Ralph's POV.
I stared at Keela, my heart pounding in my chest, torn between rage and panic as the echoes of the crowd's gasps faded into the background. What was she thinking? The jug clanged as it hit the ground, and in that moment, I snapped out of my stupor. Without another thought, I moved forward, grabbing her arm and spinning her around to face me. "What the hell are you thinking?" I demanded, my voice low and intense, my eyes searching hers for an explanation. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw something in them, determination mixed with fear. But before I could process it, she broke into a laugh. It was forced, brittle, the sound of someone trying desperately to mask their true emotions. "Oh my God," she clutching her stomach as if the whole thing were some sort of joke. What did I just drink? I was so thirsty, I thought it was water, but whatever that was, it tastes awful. I hope I'm not gonna die from it. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was deflecting, trying to downplay the gravity of what she'd just done. I searched her face, looking for any sign of pain or distress, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. Instead, she looked anywhere but at me, her laugh fading into a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Keela," I began, my voice softening, concern lacing my tone. But before I could say another word, she stepped back, slipping out of my grasp. She moved quickly, grabbing Dahlia's hand, who had been hovering nearby, and headed up the steps, away from the ring. I watched her go, exhaling slowly as the full weight of what had just happened settled over me. That liquid was meant for alphas, for those who had the strength to withstand its effects. Even for a strong wolf, it was dangerous, pushing them to their limits. And now Keela, a human, had just downed it like it was nothing. I knew what was coming. The herbs in that concoction were going to take their toll on her, and it wasn't going to be pretty. My heart clenched at the thought of what she might go through in the coming hours, the pain and delirium that were sure to follow. "I need to check on my mate," I muttered under my breath, taking a step toward the edge of the ring. But before I could move any further, Alexander's sharp voice cut through the tension. "The fight is beginning now," he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. He handed me another gold jug, his gaze piercing. I reached out to him through the mind link, my frustration boiling over. "I need to see my mate now, Alexander. She just had the fucking herbs." Alexander's response was curt, almost dismissive. "She'll be fine for now. The herbs will take effect in a few hours. If you step out of the ring, it will be the end of you and your pack." His words were like a cold slap to the face. I knew he was right, but the instinct to protect Keela was overpowering. I forced myself to turn toward the now quiet crowd, my eyes scanning the sea of faces until I spotted her. She stood off to the side with Dahlia beside her, her expression a mix of determination and worry. Our eyes met, and through our mind link, her voice reached me, calm but firm. "You've got this, Ralph." Her encouragement should have been reassuring, but all it did was heighten the tension coiling in my chest. Before I could respond to her, Zach's growl echoed through, snapping my attention back to him. His eyes blazed with fury, and his voice dripped with poison. "Let's get this over with," he sneered, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "I can't stand you and your little bitch." The words were a deliberate provocation, meant to throw me off balance, to ignite the rage simmering inside me. I felt the anger flare up, but I forced myself to stay focused. My grip on the jug tightened, my knuckles turning white as I raised it to my lips. The bitter taste of the herbs slid down my throat, burning like fire. Zach followed suit, never breaking eye contact, his gaze as cold and deadly as the storm brewing inside me. A hush fell over the crowd, the only sound the distant howling wolf. As the last note faded into silence, we both shifted. Skin turning to fur, muscles expanding, bones cracking and reshaping. Then, without a second's hesitation, we launched at each other, the air crackling with energy. The collision was brutal. our bodies slamming together with a force that sent a cloud of dust and sand spiraling into the air. My claws dug into Zach's side as I snarled, my teeth snapping inches from his throat, but he was just as fast. He twisted, his powerful jaws latching onto my shoulder, the pain sharp and searing as he tried to rip me apart. I roared, the sound echoing through the cave, and with a surge of strength, I shoved him off, the ground buckling beneath us. Zach landed on his full four, skidding to a stop, the sand flying up in a spray around him. We circled each other, the growls rumbling deep in our chests, our hackles raised, each of us waiting for the other to make the next move. But there was no pause, no time to think, only the fight. We clashed again, a whirlwind of fur, teeth, and claws. Each strike sent shockwaves through the earth, the ground splitting and rising from the impact of our blows. My vision narrowed, focusing solely on the beast in front of me, the world around us fading into a blur of sand and blood. Zach was relentless, his strength undeniable, but I fought with a fury born of something deeper, something primal. Every thought of Keela, of the pack, fueled my resolve, pushing me beyond my limits. I dodged a vicious swipe from his claws and countered, raking my own across his flank, drawing blood. He howled in pain but retaliated instantly, his teeth sinking into my side. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't let it stop me. With a roar, I tore free, blood dripping from my wounds as I lunged at him again. We grappled, a tangle of fur and fury, the sandy ground beneath us turning red as we fought for dominance, for survival. The crowd's cheers and gasps were distant, almost insignificant, compared to the thunderous pounding of my heart, the searing heat of the battle coursing through my veins. As the fight raged on, I couldn't resist the urge to glance up, searching the crowd for Keela. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of adrenaline and concern fueling every move. But when I looked, I couldn't see her. Panic clawed at my mind, tightening like a vice around my heart. Where was she? Was she okay? I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept coming, relentless and suffocating. I scanned the crowd again, my eyes frantically darting from one face to another, but she was nowhere in sight. A cold dread settled in my gut, the worst possibilities flooding my mind. Had the herbs taken effect? Was she in danger? In that split second of distraction, Zach made his move. His teeth sank deep into the side of my neck, the pain blinding, searing through me like a bolt of lightning. A guttural roar tore from my throat as the force of his attack sent me crashing to the ground, blood splashing out and staining the sand beneath us. But Zach didn't stop there. With a savage growl, he sank his teeth into my shoulder, the pain unbearable, white-hot and paralyzing. I could feel his jaws locking onto me, the pressure threatening to snap bone. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges as I struggled to breathe, to move, to fight back. Zach's weight bore down on me, his teeth inches from my throat, his eyes alight with savage triumph. Through the haze of pain, his voice slithered into my mind, mocking and cruel. "What did I tell you, Ralph? I told you I would end you, in front of your people and your little pet human. You may have been born with alpha blood in your veins, but you were never a match for me. Now everything will return to its rightful owner, and that's me. And too bad you won't be here to see it, as I make your little human mate my plaything." Rage surged through me, a white-hot fury that cut through the pain and the fear. Zach's words were poison, dripping with the intent to break me, to crush whatever fight I had left. But he didn't know me, not truly. As he opened his jaws wide, preparing to deliver the final blow, something primal took over. With a burst of strength, I twisted, flipping him off of me and pinning him beneath my weight. Blood dripped down onto his fur from the wounds he had inflicted, but I didn't care. I pressed him into the ground, my mind clear and sharp. "You've said it yourself," I growled, through the mind link as I bared my teeth. "I was born alpha, and you were not." With that, I lunged, my teeth aiming for his throat. I could feel the coarse fur and warm skin beneath my jaws and taste the metallic tang of his blood just beneath the surface. But before I could rip his neck open, a force hurled me backwards, sending me crashing into the sandy ground. I recovered quickly, scrambling to my feet, my eyes wild as I searched for the source of the attack. Was this another one of Zach's tricks? My heart pounded, blood roaring in my ears as I prepared for another onslaught. But then I saw him, Damien. The entire cave seemed to hold its breath as he stood there, his presence commanding, his eyes locked on Zack. Damien moved with blinding speed. He reached down and grabbed Zack's wolf, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. In one brutal, fluid motion, he twisted Zack's head, snapping it with a sickening crack. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he reached into Zack's chest, his claws ripping through flesh and bone, and pulled out his heart in one swift motion. The cave went silent, the air thick with shock and awe. Blood dripped from Zack's heart as Damien held it in his hand, staring down at it with a twisted smile, his fangs glistening in the dim light. Then, Damien's gaze turned to me. Our eyes locked for a heartbeat, his expression unreadable before vanishing as suddenly as he had arrived. For a moment, a stunned silence hung in the air as the reality of what had just happened settled over us. Then, suddenly, chaos erupted, as if we were in a trance. The pack members surged after Damien, their growls echoing through the cave as they gave chase. But I knew they wouldn't catch him. I shifted back to my human form, blood dripping from the gashes Zack had left. My heart pounded not from exertion, but from the panic twisting in my chest. I need to find Keela. The sound of approaching footsteps made me halt for a moment, and when I turned, it was Alexander and other council members marching towards me. As they reached me, Alexander stepped forward, his gaze piercing and authoritative. "Go get your mate and your pack, Ralph," he commanded, his voice low but firm. "And get out of this place." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As Alexander turned to leave, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of understanding and urgency. Then, without another moment's hesitation, I bolted out of the ring and dashed through the cave, my heart pounding as I searched for Keela. "Keela," I called out through the mind link, desperately trying to connect with her. But there was no response. My heart clenched, fear tightening around my chest like a vice. "Keela, answer me." Nothing. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to take over. I quickened my pace, the cave walls blurring around me as I sprinted through the winding tunnels, frantically searching for any sign of her. But she was nowhere in sight, and the silence was deafening. "Dahlia," I mind-linked, shifting my focus. "Where is Keela? Is she with you?" There was a brief pause, and then Dahlia's voice came through, laced with worry. "She's with me, but she's getting out of control, Alpha." Her words sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Is it bad?" I asked, my voice betraying the panic I was trying to keep at bay. "Did anyone touch her?" "No, Alpha," Dahlia replied quickly. "But I think it's the herbs she took. They're taking their toll on her." "Where are you now?" I demanded, my voice sharp with urgency. "We're outside," Dahlia responded, giving me the exact location. "I'm coming," I replied, closing the mind link with a renewed sense of determination. I burst out of the cave, skidding to a halt as I took in the scene before me. Dahlia, Jay, Andrew, Drake, and his Luna were all gathered in a tight circle around Keela. She was in the center, encased in a shimmering magical bubble that pulsed with a soft blue light. I recognized Dahlia's magic instantly. It was her protective barrier. My heart twisted at the sight of her. Keela's eyes were wild, her expression a mix of confusion and fury, her fists pounding against the invisible walls of the bubble as if trying to break free. My eyes narrowed, and I moved toward them with purpose. "Get my mate out of that thing," I ordered, my voice sharp and commanding. Dahlia opened her mouth to speak, her eyes filled with concern, but I cut her off before she could get a word out. "I said get her out now," I barked, the urgency in my tone leaving no room for hesitation. Dahlia nodded quickly, understanding the desperation in my voice. She raised her hand, murmuring a few words under her breath, and the magical bubble flickered before disappearing completely. The moment the barrier vanished, Keela bolted forward with a speed that left me momentarily stunned. She sprinted straight to a nearby tree, wrapping her arms around its thick trunk as if it were her lifeline. Her fingers dug into the bark, and with a determined grunt, she bent down, straining to pull it up by its roots. "Why aren't you moving?" she muttered, frustration lacing her voice as she struggled against the immovable tree. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild and unfocused. The herbs were affecting her far more than I anticipated. Instead of pain, they made her delirious. I stood there, stunned, unsure of what to do next. Taking a deep breath, I scanned the gathered pack members. "Everyone, prepare to leave," I instructed, my tone firm but calm. I glanced back at Keela, who had already moved on to another tree, attempting once again to uproot it. I approached her slowly, making sure to keep my movements gentle to avoid startling her. "Keela," I called softly. She turned towards me, her expression blank for a moment as she registered my presence. Then, a broad smile spread across her face. "Another tree!" she exclaimed with childlike wonder. "How did I miss this one?" She reached out to touch me, her smile fading into confusion as her fingers brushed against my chest. "Ooh, this tree is soft," she murmured, her eyes widening in surprise. She roamed her hands over my body, then pulled them back, now stained with blood. She stared at her palms, her voice filled with awe. "You're not just a soft tree. You have a beautiful color, too." I clenched my jaw, suppressing the mix of frustration and amusement bubbling inside me. I looked down at my mate, wondering how I was going to handle her in this state. Without a word, I bent down and scooped her up, hoisting her over my shoulder. She squealed in excitement, her arms spreading wide like a bird about to take flight. "Cora, come see," she shouted with glee. I did it. I finally carried the soft tree. Her voice echoed through the clearing, drawing curious looks from the pack members. As I approached the gathered pack, I felt her hands reach down unexpectedly. Before I could react, she began smacking my ass repeatedly, like a drum. "I'm a strong woman. I can lift soft trees and swing them in the air," she sang loudly, her voice carrying a playful tune as she continued drumming on my butt. Andrew let out a hearty laugh, the sound booming through the otherwise tense atmosphere. I noticed the others stifling their own laughter, shoulders shaking as they struggled to contain themselves. My irritation flared, and I shot Andrew a stern look. "Stop it, Andrew," I growled, my voice laced with warning. "This isn't funny." But Andrew couldn't stop. His laughter only grew louder, tears forming in the corners of his eyes as he doubled over. The infectious sound finally broke the tension, and soon a few other pack members were chuckling too, unable to hold it in any longer. I sighed deeply, a mixture of exasperation and helpless affection washing over me as I adjusted Keela on my shoulder. Despite the chaos, we needed to get moving and find a way to help her. "All right," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head slightly. "Let's get out of here." I glanced over at Andrew, my irritation simmering beneath the surface. "You're gonna carry us," I said, my voice firm. Andrew, still catching his breath from laughter, nodded in agreement. "Of course," he replied, his tone shifting to match my seriousness. "Everyone, shift," I commanded. The pack members nodded and, within moments, shifted into their wolf forms. I watched as Andrew shifted, his powerful wolf standing ready. Keela, now softly humming to herself, had gone quiet. I carefully adjusted her and sat her on Andrew's broad back, ensuring she was secure. As I swung my leg over to sit behind her, she suddenly tipped to the side. Before I could catch her, she fell to the ground with a heavy thud that made my heart jolt. "Holy fuck," I muttered, quickly kneeling beside her. Keela groaned in pain, her eyes fluttering open, but instead of tears, another burst of laughter escaped her lips. She sprawled on the ground, both her legs and arms splayed out wide. I reached down to lift her back onto Andrew's wolf, but just as I leaned in, she abruptly raised her head, colliding her forehead with mine. "The trees are whispering. Can you hear them?" she murmured, her eyes wide and unfocused. Then, just as quickly, she let out a childish cry, rubbing her forehead. "Ouch! That hurts!" I clenched my jaw, biting back a groan of frustration. Carefully, I lifted her again, this time more securely, and sat her back on Andrew's wolf. I swung my leg over and settled behind her, holding her hands firmly in place to prevent any more unexpected movements. "Let's go," I ordered. The pack didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted off, the forest blurring around us as we raced through the trees, with Keela safely secured in my grasp. As we reached the clearing where our cars were parked, the pack began to shift back to their human forms. I jumped down from Andrew's back, steadying Keela as I lifted her off and placed her on the grass ground. She was still humming softly, her eyes half closed in a daze. "All right, everyone, get in the cars," I instructed. "Dahlia, you're in the back with Keela." Dahlia nodded and quickly opened the car door, climbing into the back seat. I carefully guided Keela over, her feet dragging slightly, and helped her into the car beside Dahlia. Dahlia wrapped an arm around Keela to keep her steady, but Keela started screaming, singing, and crying all at once, throwing wild punches at Dahlia, who did her best to keep her from jumping out of the car. By the time we pulled into the pack's yard, it was late morning. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. I got out of the car and walked around to the other side to carry Keela. She had fallen asleep on the drive back, her head resting gently on Dahlia's shoulder. I carefully lifted her out, cradling her against my chest, and carried her upstairs to our room. Inside, I laid her down on the bed, pulling the cover gently over her. She stirred slightly but remained asleep, her face soft and peaceful. As I stood there, I couldn't help but notice how unnervingly pale she had become, her complexion so drained that it looked as if she had been ill for years. My heart jolted at the sight. I knew I needed to get her some medicine to help counteract the herbs and restore her color. With one last worried glance, I headed downstairs to meet the pack. They were all gathered in the main hall, their expressions a mix of weariness and anticipation. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I want to thank all of you for your support today," I began, my voice strong and clear. "I know the fight didn't go as planned because of Damien, but the important thing is that I am still your alpha. And I'm telling you now, as your alpha, that today marks a new beginning for the Moonrise Pack." As the pack nodded in agreement, I caught a sudden whiff of Damien's scent. My instincts flared with tension. What the hell is he doing here now? I thought, my senses sharpening. Damien was never one to let anyone catch his scent. He was too cunning for that. So why now? What is he up to? I noticed the change in the pack as well. They had caught his scent too. Their expressions shifted from trust to concern, and I could see some of them starting to move toward the exit, ready to defend the territory. "Wait," I commanded, raising a hand to stop them. "Damien isn't here for any of you. He's here for me. At least, I assume that's the case. I'll go find out what he wants." The pack hesitated, but they trusted my judgment. I nodded to reassure them, then turned toward the door. As I stepped outside, I looked around for any sign of him, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then, as if materializing out of thin air, he appeared before me, moving with a speed only a vampire like him could manage. Before I could even react, he grabbed my hand, his grip like iron, and pressed a tiny frosted bottle into my palm. I barely had time to register the cold glass against my skin before Damien's voice cut through the air, low and urgent. "Your mate drank the poison that was meant for you," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "Give it to her. It's the only thing that can counteract it." I stared down at the tiny glass bottle in my hand, its dark liquid swirling ominously inside. My gaze shifted back to Damien, disbelief and suspicion flooding my mind. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the shirt, yanking him closer. "What the hell are you talking about, Damien?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. "When did Keela take poison?" Damien's expression remained cold, but he didn't pull away. "She took it when she consumed the herbs," he replied calmly, as if he had all the time in the world. "The herbs had poison in it and were meant for you. She drank it instead." My mind raced as I processed his words. The herbs, of course. Kayla had drunk the mixture, dismissing my worries with a casual excuse about being thirsty and a laugh. I had been so focused on the fight, on Zach and the pack, that I hadn't realized just how serious it was. Damien's voice cut through my thoughts, his tone even more chilling. "And if she doesn't take the antidote now, the poison will kill her in her sleep. She won't wake up."
Keela's POV.
I tugged at Ralph's hand, trying to pull him toward the ice cream shop. The brightly colored sign above the door read, "Scoops and Smiles," and the kids were laughing inside, faces smeared with chocolate and sprinkles. The sweet aroma of freshly made waffle cones and creamy scoops of different flavors filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of indulging in a little treat. But Ralph, as always, resisted. "Come on, Ralph," I urged, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It's just ice cream. It'll be fun." He glanced at the brightly colored sign above the shop, then back at me, his expression impassive. "Mate, this kind of ice cream eating is for kids and teenagers," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "Not for someone like me." I stopped pulling and let go of his hand, the sudden release leaving my fingers tingling. My heart sank as I took in his stoic face, the same face that had ruined every date we'd tried to have in the past few months. It was always the same, Me trying to find something we could enjoy together, and him shutting it down because it didn't fit his idea of what an alpha should do. You know what? I said, my voice laced with frustration. I give up. No more dates. Ralph cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly as he glanced around the busy mall. Are you mad again? He asked, his voice softer now, as if he genuinely couldn't understand why I was upset. I looked up at him, meeting his concerned gaze. No, Ralph, I'm not mad, I replied, my tone weary. I'm just tired. I'm tired of trying to make something work that clearly isn't going to. He frowned, his brows knitting together in confusion. What do you mean? I mean this. I gestured around us trying to do normal things like a normal couple. It's not working. Every time we go on a date, it ends up like this. Me getting frustrated and you being... Well, you. I sighed, trying to keep my cool. I know you're not used to this, and I understand that, but I want us to have a life beyond the pack and all its responsibilities. I want to go on silly dates and eat ice cream without worrying about what anyone thinks or if it's beneath you. Ralph nodded slowly, his eyes softening as he considered my words. I'm sorry, mate, I don't know how to be that guy. He confessed. I looked at him, my frustration easing a bit at his honesty. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, Ralph. I just need you to try. We both need a break from all the chaos, a chance to be together and have some fun. He was silent for a moment, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A small, hesitant smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. All right, he said, stepping closer to me. Let's try again, but can we maybe skip the ice cream this time? I couldn't help but laugh, the tension easing from my shoulders. Fine, no ice cream, I agreed, shaking my head in amusement. But you owe me a date, a proper one. No complaints. He grinned, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Deal, and I'll even let you choose. I smiled back at him, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Maybe this date hadn't gone as planned again, but at least we were trying, and that was a start. All right, Mr. Alpha, I said playfully. You've got yourself a deal. He looked at me with curiosity, a small smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. So, what do you want to do now? He asked. How about going shopping or grabbing something to eat? I shook my head, letting out a soft laugh. No, it's fine. Let's just head back to the pack house. All right, if that's what you want, he said, taking my hand in his. But first, I added, stopping in my tracks. We need to stop by my auntie's house. I promised I'd bring Cora a cheesecake. When we arrived at my aunt's house, I hopped out of the car with the cheesecake in hand and hurried up the steps to the front door. Just as I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open, and there stood Cora, her baby bump prominent beneath her loose-fitting dress. Her eyes lit up as if she'd been waiting for me. What took you so long? She exclaimed, snatching the cheesecake from my hands with surprising speed for someone so heavily pregnant. She turned and barreled back into the house, her excitement clear. Cora, slow down. I laughed, watching her waddle away as fast as she could. Can't. Baby's hungry, and so am I, she called over her shoulder, already digging into the cheesecake with a plastic fork. I shook my head in amusement and stepped inside, looking around. Where's Auntie? I asked. Just then, a nurse I had appointed for her came out from the kitchen holding a glass of water, a warm smile on her face. Your aunt went out for a walk with her friends a little while ago. Oh, all right, I nodded. Thanks for letting me know. I'll catch up with her later then. I turned to leave, but not before calling out to Cora. Don't eat too much of that cheesecake at once. You'll choke the baby. Cora's voice came back, muffled with a mouthful of cheesecake. Don't worry about me, and go back. I hate it when you make my brother-in-law-to-be wait too long. I chuckled, shaking my head as I made my way back to the car. Ralph was waiting patiently, the engine idling as he watched me approach. She's got quite the appetite, I said with a smile as I slid back into the passenger seat. Ralph grinned, a rare and genuine smile that made my heart flutter. Sounds like someone else I know, he teased gently. I playfully swatted his arm, laughing. All right, Mr. Funny, let's get back to the pack house. As we drove back to the pack house, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the landscape. The quiet between us was comfortable, a gentle reminder of how far we had come in our relationship. Ralph broke the silence with a playful tone in his voice. Since the date didn't go as planned again, how about we do something more fun? Just the two of us in our beloved bedroom. He glanced over at me, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Besides, the weather's getting chilly. I couldn't help but laugh, turning to him with a wide smile. Wait, why do we always have to end up in our beloved bedroom whenever our date night fails? I teased, raising an eyebrow. Hold on a second, Mr. Alpha. Why do I feel like you do it on purpose so you can get under my pants? Because you know I'm too weak to resist you. Ralph chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that made my heart flutter. I don't do it on purpose, he said, his voice low and sincere. But I can't help it. I just can't get enough of you. Every time I'm near you, I want to be even closer, like I'm getting to know you all over again for the first time. I felt my cheeks flush at his words, and I playfully rolled my eyes, but inside, my heart swelled with affection. You're impossible, I muttered, though the smile on my face gave away how much I enjoyed his attention. As we continued our drive, I leaned back in my seat, letting out a contented sigh. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the scenery pass by, my thoughts drifting. It was amazing how life had turned out, how everything had changed from how it started. There was a time when Ralph and I couldn't stand each other. Our relationship was fueled by misunderstandings, anger, and hurt. The bond between us had felt more like a curse than a blessing. But now it was different. The hatred had turned into something so much more. A deep, abiding love that had surprised us both. I smiled to myself, feeling the warmth of that love settle in my chest. Ralph and I had faced so many challenges together, both within the pack and in our personal lives. We had our ups and downs, our disagreements and frustrations, but through it all, we had found a way to make it work. It wasn't always perfect, but it was ours. And that was enough. I instinctively reached up and touched my neck, where Damien's mark used to be. The skin was smooth now, the mark long gone after the incident with the herbs that had nearly taken my life, if it wasn't for him. Despite his cold demeanor, Damien had always watched over me. My thoughts drifted to him for a brief moment, wondering where he had gone, if he was all right, if he was happy. It was a fleeting thought, but one that lingered, hovering at the edge of my mind. Ralph reached over and took my hand in his thumb gently stroking the back of it, pulling me back from my thoughts. I turned to look at him, my heart swelling with love for the man who had become my everything. You know, I said softly, my voice thick with emotion, I never imagined we'd be here, like this. From where we started, it's like night and day. He squeezed my hand, his eyes softening as they met mine. Neither did I, he admitted, but I wouldn't change a thing. Every step, every struggle, it brought us here, and for that I'm grateful. A smile spread across my face as I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Me too, I whispered, feeling a deep warmth and contentment settle in my chest. The car rolled on, taking us home, back to our pack house and the life we'd built together. A life filled with challenges, but also with love, laughter, and a future I could never have imagined. I leaned against Ralph, letting my eyes close for just a moment, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together.
This marks the end of Alpha's forbidden mate, but the story continues in a new version under the title, The Sting of the Vampire's Bite.